Good morning. My name is Charlotte Bergeron. I'm on the board of the Baton Rouge Right to Life, and I'm the co-campaign coordinator for 40 Days for Life in Baton Rouge. I'm also an attorney, and I was very privileged to assist with pro-life legislation this spring. I am very honored that I've been asked to serve as the moderator of this esteemed panel. I would first like to introduce the panel members. To my far right is Congressman Gow. Congressman Joseph Gow served as a U.S. Representative for Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District from 2009 to 2011. He is a part of the Republican Party and is an advocate for life. Congressman Gow was the first Vietnamese American to serve in Congress. He and his wife, Kate, have 2 children. To his left is U.S. Senator David Vitter. Senator Vitter was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1999. He was elected to his first term in the Senate in 2004, and he was overwhelmingly reelected in 2010. He is committed to protecting the unborn and passing pro-life legislation in our state, for our state. Senator Vitter and his wife Wendy have 4 children and live in Metairie. And to his left is... Not to anyone's left, Oh, you got me. You got me. I'll quickly say to his left, but certainly on the right, is Mike Johnson, a fantastic pro-life attorney that I much admire and look up to. He's a nationally recognized litigator and legal analyst who operates his private law practice from his hometown of Shreveport. I believe he's 4th generation. And serves Louisiana Right to Life as its legal counsel and regional director for North Louisiana. He and his wife, Kelly, have 4 children. And unfortunately, also to his left is Ben Clapper, the executive director of Louisiana Right to Life. And he's the man that we look to for the strategic plans to lead our state in its wonderful pro-life direction. His expertise in the pro-life movement ranges from the political and legislative realm to youth education and activism. He and his wife, Kristen, have 3 adorable daughters. Okay. Our panel is going to focus on Obamacare and the HHS mandate. Most people hear about Obamacare all of the time, but few know about its impact on abortion. Fortunately, we are blessed to have 2 people on our panel that were right in the middle of this debate. Congressman Joseph Gow worked closely with House pro-life leadership to stop Obamacare from funding abortion, and Senator Vitter led the way in Louisiana in preventing Obamacare as much as he possibly could. So first, I'd like to direct this question to Congressman Gow. Since the House passed the first version of the health care bill, Congressman Gow, could you give us an overview of your experience with the health care bill, and specifically what you did to help prevent abortion funding as the House legislation neared passage in November of 2009?
Thank you very much. As I'm pretty sure most of you know, and especially those of us who are in the legislature know, that we are always required to make those decisions that at oftentimes very conflicting to us personally as well as to in connection with other issues that we might have to consider. When we were debating what is now Obamacare in the House, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you might not know the debates that were going on. There were basically two bills that went through the U.S. Congress and that we had to vote on. The first bill that I voted on was the House version of the Affordable Care Act. And during the first vote in connection with healthcare reform, the issue of abortion funding and a pro-life stance was extremely contentious in the House because the Democrat control leadership, they knew full well that without a pro-life provision in the Healthcare Reform Act, that bill will never pass the House because within the Democratic Party itself, there was a strong pro-life caucus being led by Congressman Stupak, and I believe he held in his caucus around 10 votes, and those 10 votes would be enough to overrail any affordable care provisions that did not include a pro-life provision. And so while we were debating on this first vote in the House, obviously we were approached by a number of groups, one of which is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And of course, as you all know, the bishops they have a pro-life stance, but they are also advocating for health care for those who are uninsured. And of course, I, as a representative of a minority district that is a predominantly African-American district, there is a duty on the one hand to represent my constituents, but at the same time, on the other hand, how do I do that while keeping to certain basic beliefs or basic moral stance that I hold? And at the same time, also certain political considerations that I have to take into account, being a Republican and Asian American representing a predominantly Democrat African American district. So for me, it was an extremely difficult decision. And basically, when I sat down and spoke with my advisors as well as the representatives of the Conference of Catholic Bishops, I informed them that as a duty to represent my district, I would have to support healthcare reform because 25% or 30% of the people of this district are uninsured. But at the same time, any healthcare act must include a pro-life provision, preventing federal fundings to go into abortion services to ensure the protection of conscience. So when we were able to get that in through the Stupak amendment at the very last minute, I was able to vote for the House version of the healthcare reform bill. But as you know, that health bill died after the election in Massachusetts when Senator Brown was elected to the US Senate, where the Senate was no longer filibuster-proof. So any bill that would be kicked back to the Senate will be filibustered by the Republican Party. So the only way for them then to get a healthcare reform bill through was to push through the House a bill that was already passed by the Senate. And that bill obviously did not contain any of the pro-life provisions that the pro-life members in the House would require. So again, we were faced with another vote in the House, and this time voting on a bill that does not contain the protection for conscience as well as the prohibition against federal funding for abortion. So that is why you would see President Obama standing up saying that he will issue an executive order to prevent any federal fundings to be used for abortion services. And of course, that was able to convey and to convince a lot of the pro-life members on the Democrat side. At least it gives them an avenue for escape, because again, a lot of them, they were being pressured by the House leadership to vote for it. They were being hassled, they were threatened. When you sit down and talk with them, you saw it on their face that they wanted an out. They wanted to stand with their party, but at the same time, they were torn by their conviction to defend life. And so the executive order was their avenue of escape. And so Stupak was able to convince all of his members, except for one member from Illinois, Lipinski, between he and I, we did not vote for the final passage of the health care reform bill, which was the Senate bill, which Senator Vitter knows extremely well in full detail of what that bill entails. But it was an extremely contentious debate. And again, many of the, especially pro-life legislators, we were somewhat caught in the middle between an ambiguous positions in regards to our, especially religious leadership. Because on the one hand, you have nuns defending the Senate bill. On the other hand, you have the Conference of Catholic Bishops against the bill. So you have President Obama touting the Catholic nuns who are supporting the bill, and then the pro-life members who are touting the Catholic bishops who are against the bill. And so us Catholic legislators, we were some caught in the middle between the nuns and the bishops. And it was extremely, extremely contentious issue. But at the same time, those of us who fully understand the bill knew that an executive order can be changed at any moment, at any time. So I had to vote against the final passage of the bill, but we were not able to convince other pro-life members to vote. And that is basically pretty much my experience of the healthcare reform bill when I was in the U.S. House.
Oh, thank you, Congressman Gao, for explaining the complexities of the history. We need to be mindful of the internal struggle in the churches. We want to make sure that people have adequate health care, but we also don't want to sacrifice our intrinsic values in that quest. Senator Vitter, after the House initially passed Obamacare with the Stupak Amendment, the question at that time was if the Senate would include similar protections in a Senate-passed bill. On December 8, 2009, the Nelson-Hatch Amendment failed, and Senator Nelson eventually accepted the current abortion funding structure of Obamacare. Could you offer some insight into that situation?
Sure. It's great to be with all of you, and thank you again for the invitation. Well, compared to what was going on in the House side, there was not even this smokescreen in the Senate side, for the simple reason that the majority, unlike the House, was clearly pro-abortion. So anti-abortion forces, certainly including myself, had to try to put up amendments to create clear prohibitions, and as you said, those failed. So there wasn't even the smokescreen that we were going to stop this or slow this down as there was in the Senate side. I was real concerned from the beginning, and I'm still concerned, that Obamacare fundamentally shifts what I think was a consensus in this country on the issue. You know, before Obamacare, I think there was a solid consensus that on the one hand, unfortunately, abortion is legal, but on the other hand, two key points. First, that we would not use taxpayer funds to pay for abortion because so many Americans, roughly half at least, find it a huge moral problem. And secondly, we would always protect those folks' conscience in any way, including if they were in the medical profession, in hospitals, or in terms of paying for different types of coverage. I thought from the beginning Obamacare was an assault on those two key parts of the American consensus. And unfortunately, over time, I think that's been proved right. It was an assault on the ban on taxpayer funding, and it was an assault on conscience protection. And there were these promises and smoke screens, but at the end of the day, they really meant nothing. And I think that was a little more clear a little earlier on in the Senate for the reasons I mentioned. Now, on the abortion, taxpayer funding of abortion front, I'm afraid that's happening through the exchanges and many other ways under Obamacare. On the conscience protection, there is some hope there. Just yesterday, the D.C. Circuit, the second most important court in America, struck down that provision of Obamacare. Said that was a violation of religious freedom and liberty. Now, circuit courts, I think, are split 2-2 on the issue, so this clearly will go to the Supreme Court. But I think there's a very good opportunity to at least win in the courts, hopefully, on that important tenet, which, as I said, I think at least has been part of the sort of tortured consensus in America on abortion.
Senator Vitter, on the issue of exchanges, is there currently legislation seeking to modify that process?
I'm sure there is. I don't remember the precise bill, but it's clear that in the present Senate, it has no chance of passing. Now, at least with regard to state exchanges, there is a provision that was in the original bill that allows states to prohibit abortion services in plans on state exchanges. But that means plenty of states aren't going to do that. Pro-abortion states will never pass that, and the federal exchange is a whole different matter. So yes, there are proposals to change that, but they're not going to pass in the current Senate.
Okay. Are you aware of any litigation right now regarding those states that would seek to have a more pro-life situation with the exchanges?
Well, that provision is in Obamacare, so that's clear that a state can prohibit abortion services in plans on a state exchange. So I don't think that's in doubt or under threat.
Good, good. That's good news. I'd like to ask Ben a question. Can you provide us a glimpse into the details on how Obamacare subsidizes abortion?
Sure. I'm going to move one thing off here and put show one slide real quick to help exemplify what Congressman McGowan and Senator Vitter talked about here. We had, because there was no complete protection that was made in Obamacare from funding abortion, we've actually seen now a whole slew of different ways that Obamacare has ended up funding abortion. So let me put my eyeballs on and get to the slide I'm looking for here. So this goes through all different types of mandates, and this is some of the background that Senator Vitter was talking about, that since 1976 we had something called the Hyde Amendment in place that protected and made a firewall between abortion and public funding. And that was in the main stream of health care funds, which was Medicaid. Since Obamacare creates a whole separate stream of funding, it would have to have something exactly like the Hyde Amendment put into it. That's what the Stupak Amendment originally was. That's what the Nelson Hatch Amendment was in the Senate. That did not get added in it. So we just all this we just went over this. So in the end result, we know that the Health Care Act allows health plans and state exchanges to cover elective abortion unless a state opt-out, as Senator Vitter was just talking about. So if we go through, we'll see. Oh, this is really slow. Sorry. I'm going to go back. There's 23 states that have currently opted out of the abortion provisions of Obamacare. 27 states in the District of Columbia currently have not passed any state legislation opting out. We've just found out because Louisiana decided not to institute an Obamacare exchange in the state, so there's a multi-state or the federal exchange that kind of goes between other states, that Louisiana is not operating but is still in place here. So if you were to get through the online system, which many people are not making it through the online system, but if you did get through the online system, there's 4 companies in Louisiana that are selling health plans right now. Blue Cross, Humana, and 2 others that I can't remember off the top of my head. Since we passed legislation protecting the state exchange, there was question of if the state didn't create an exchange, does that legislation still apply to federal plans sold in Louisiana? Fortunately, yesterday at about 3:30, we finally got the answer on that question from Commissioner of Insurance Jim Donnellan in Louisiana, who their staff finally was able to go through all the documents for these health plans to determine that in the 4 companies in their plans that are available to Louisiana citizens through the multi-state Louisiana exchange, that none of those plans currently cover abortion. They're actually they're prohibited from covering abortion. So the state law that we passed in 2010 still applies to multi-state plans being applied here in Louisiana. So it's very complicated, but we know that in Louisiana we're going to be protected, and so will 23 other states. But that means that 27 other states, the subsidies that are coming from the federal government to subsidize the entire insurance marketplace will also help to subsidize plans that would cover abortion. So to show you how that looks in the end, well, and you also see here that the regs that were released show that when someone goes, not in Louisiana, to think if you were in one of these 27 other states, if you were to go to enroll for a plan, it's not like you would go online and it would say, this plan covers abortion, or this plan does not cover abortion. It would only be disclosed to the person at the time of enrollment, basically at the point when they're signing their benefits, and there's like 10 pages of fine print in there. So the Obamacare exchange is in no way required to tell people if it covers abortion or not. So you're going to have people entering into the system who don't know, and they're looking for a plan. They might be pro-life, but they might not be thinking about it when they go through the process. If it said this plan covers abortion, they might think about it. In every exchange where the state law has not opted it out, each exchange must have at least one plan that covers abortion and at least one that does not. It doesn't say, it could mean that 99 cover abortion and 1 does not. I'm going to go through here. I'm going to go through this very slow. So you can see here, you could have a state exchange that looks like this, where 1 plan includes abortion coverage, but 99 do not include abortion coverage. Then you could have a state where 99 plans include abortion coverage and only 1 plan does not include abortion coverage. So let's say, how will this impact some people? Well, let's say their employer plan covers abortion. Well, most people are not going to go to their employer and probably try to get out of this situation. They could also, a consumer could unwillingly or unknowingly choose a plan because abortion is not disclosed in the exchange advertising like we just happened. Also, an abortion-free plan in the exchange may not meet the family needs for coverages of the provider network. So the plan maybe in the state that is abortion-free could be a plan that's not as good as the other plans on other things, and it would not meet their health needs in other ways. So it really locks people in certain states to certain things. So, but what actually happens, the way the executive order set things up is that if a plan covers abortion, the only way that President Obama was able to say with some, I guess, some degree of honesty that the government would not be funding plans that cover abortion is because they required that when you paid your bill for a plan that covers abortion, that you submit 2 checks or 2 direct deposits on a monthly basis. One is for your 99% or all of your health care, your general premium. And then there is at least a minimum of a $1 charge that you have to submit separately that would go into literally an abortion fund in the government, and then the government would, in the exchange, would use that fund to pay for other people's abortion within your specific exchange. So even if you had a 55-year-old male who signs up in a plan that covers abortion, he has to submit $1, at least a minimum of $1, and it hasn't been specified what some plans may charge, that would then have to be used as money that could shift over to pay for other people's abortions in the situation. So the government and these exchanges have basically become the middlemen to subsidize and to move abortion funds around in our country. There's an estimate that just came out. Go through this. So before, as Senator Vitter was talking about, there was a firewall between abortion and tax dollars. Now there's no firewall in Obamacare, and it's bookkeeping tricks requiring individuals to pay for abortion. So we talked about this. So this is a new report that came out just recently that showed that from the Lozier, it's an institute that studies these issues, that said 5.5 million females will gain coverage for abortion, split between Medicaid expansion in states that fund abortion through their Medicaid programs and through the exchanges subsidized by the government. They estimated that between 71,000 and 111,000 abortions would increase and be paid based on the Obamacare system that has been expanded. Now, that is based on the fact that 2% of that 5.5 million people would choose abortion. So it could be greater, it could be less, based on that. But we've basically created the system where the government is involved with helping to subsidize and fuel the abortion situation. I'll show one last slide before I move back to the other panelist. This is, I talked here simply about the abortion premium in state exchanges and the abortion premium in multi-state exchanges. This doesn't even cover possible abortion funding through community health centers. For example, Planned Parenthood gets a chunk of the $7 billion federally. There's no protection here against abortion funding, regardless if in the past through Medicaid that they've been protected. You also have what Senator Vitter talked about, the HHS mandate, the contraceptive mandate, preventive service mandate, different names, different people. But what's interesting is when they defined in the legislation preventive services, which right now includes contraception, sterilization, and abortifacient, there's nothing in there that says that abortion couldn't be required in those preventive services. So at any point down the road, this administration, this president, or a future administration could, if this law stands and this provision stands, could simply decide that surgical abortion should be included in these services, and therefore employers would be required to cover that in insurance across the state or across the country. So you see in the system, because there's no protection, which Senator Vitter and Congressman Gow work towards, since there's no protection, it basically opens the door to the system where the government becomes a middleman and a subsidizer in the entire abortion market. Some people call it the Planned Parenthood Full Employment Act, because the amount of money that's being that's come into the situation. And Senator Vitter, I know that you talked about kind of the current battle. Is there, I mean, based on all these things, what do you see as the current battle in any way that we can make progress on these type of things?
Well, I think it's real simple. This present Senate would vote the same way as the Senate voted when all of this was debated. In other words, the wrong way. And it comes down to changing the makeup of this Senate. Now, the good news is there is a real opportunity to do that next year in the next federal election. That could, in fact, change in a significant way, and one of the battleground races, of course, will be right here in Louisiana, Mary Landrieu, Bill Cassidy.
It sounds like we have some marching orders. Yeah. I hope I can ask this. How many other battleground states are there that we really need to pay attention to and pray about?
Yeah, I'd say in next year's election there'll be 8 to 10 really key competitive Senate races. The good news is all but one of those are current Democratic seats. So the Democrats are really playing defense just in terms of who is up for re-election and who's in a competitive race. Now, for the Senate to go to a Republican majority, we would need a net pickup of 6 seats. Now that, unfortunately, is not precisely the same as going pro-life, because we have some pro-abortion Republicans, but that would be an important start. So there'll be 8 to 10 key competitive Senate races next year.
And Senator Vitter, what are some of the major pieces of legislation that will be considered in 2014 that will then have people on the record? It could be pain capable,
Sure.
conscience. If you could talk a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, because those of us who are very focused on life issues want to create a clear record through votes leading up to that election. And so we're working weekly to map out a strategy to try to force those votes. Not that we're going to win them, in the present Harry Reid Senate, but to create a clear record. And so that certainly includes the fetal pain bill. It certainly includes legislation I have to prohibit sex selection abortions, which is a very real phenomenon around the world, including in America. I think that in particular has a lot of importance because, first of all, it's important substantively to prohibit at least some category of abortions. But also I think politically it's important because I think, much like the partial birth abortion debate, it correctly categorizes the other side, the pro-abortion left, as outside the mainstream and as extreme, because I think the average American, even if they're pro-choice in some sense, would absolutely grimace at sex selection abortions. So we have a list of possibilities, and we're working very methodically to try to force votes on those to set up a clear record.
At this point on sex selection abortion, how has the left talked about that issue? That's definitely one of their hard issues. So how are they even characterizing it?
Well, what makes me feel strongly that it's a big opportunity, again, it's important substantively, but I think it's important politically too, and a big opportunity, is they mostly don't want to talk about it.
Right. It silences them.
They mostly, it's very clear, they just want to avoid the whole debate, and they mostly don't want to talk about it because they have no good mainstream argument to an average American.
And so they just rely on the old tired rhetoric that this
Right.
is all just an attack on access to abortion.
Right. Yeah, they'll claim that this is going to completely end a woman's right to choose, et cetera. The language of the bill is very clear that it would not. The language of the bill is very clear that it doesn't put any affirmative burdens on doctors to make inquiries, to do investigations. So it's carefully written to avoid any of that, but they'll still claim it anyway.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next, I'd like to ask Mike, where does Obamacare stand currently in the courts?
Well, we're so grateful for the valiant leadership of Louisiana's congressional delegation because, as you know, the quarterback is Senator Vitter and leading the charge and fighting all this. But when we lose those votes, when we don't control the Senate and we don't have the White House, the reality is these laws get passed, and the next best option we have is litigation. And so, as you know, in terms of the HHS mandate, there's been a lot of litigation that's been filed around the country. Many of those cases are working their ways through the federal appellate courts. I'm counsel on a couple of those. We filed one here in Louisiana on behalf of Louisiana College. It was the fifth of what is now, I think, 75 lawsuits that have been filed on behalf of businesses, for-profit organizations, as well as religious and nonprofit organizations. And listen, I got to tell you, so far so good. Senator Vitter mentioned the development yesterday out of the D.C. Circuit, but we've also had several wins. I mean, at least procedurally up to this point. Just in the realm of the nonprofit lawsuits, there's 39 of those. And in 35 out of 39 of those lawsuits, we've had some form of injunctive relief granted by the various federal, district, and appellate courts. That's great news. Now, that's not an ultimate decision on the merits of the mandate, but it does say that at least in terms of those plaintiffs, there's over 200 different plaintiffs now, that the law cannot be enforced against them until the ultimate decision is decided on the merits. You may have heard about the now famous Hobby Lobby case that's being ably handled by our good friend and colleague, our own Louisiana, Kyle Duncan, who's a law school classmate of mine. He's just done fantastically well. Pray for Kyle and the Beckett Fund, his organization, and my old organization, the Alliance Defending Freedom. They've got a huge, a steep hill to climb, but so far so good. And Kyle's done a great job with the Hobby Lobby case, and they actually won it at the 10th Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. But on September 19th, the government, the Obama Department of Justice, appealed that to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we'll know in the next few weeks whether the court will take it up. Many of us assume that they will. If they do, we expect they would hear that in the June session of next year. And so everybody will be watching that very closely. There's a pretty good chance that Kyle may actually do the oral argument in that case, which would be fun to watch. So pray for that effort, and we'll watch it closely. So far, so good. Look, everybody asks us all the time, Why do you guys care so much? I mean, it's the HHS mandate, it's really just about contraception, sterilization. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. You know, what's the big deal? Well, those are abortifacients in many. The morning after pill, as we know, is an abortifacient. The point is whether, and this is my answer, and this may be yours as well, regardless of whether everyone agrees with us on the issue, whether you personally agree that it's moral or immoral, is not the real issue in the litigation. The issue is, are we going to protect and preserve the right of conscience in America? It is the most fundamental bedrock principle of the Constitution, of who we are as Americans. James Madison's the one that famously said that conscience is the most sacred of all property. It is. If we lose that, my friends, all bets are off. I mean, if we don't have the right of conscience, the most fundamental freedom that we've enjoyed since the founding of this country, listen, I'm not sure what's left of the republic, really. I mean, it's just a matter of time after that. And I know that sounds like hyperbole and, you know, that we're alarmist. You cannot overstate the importance of this issue. I mean, religious liberty is our first and most fundamental freedom, and when we lose that, all the others fall by the wayside. That's what's happened in other nations that have been taken over by tyrants and dictators. They always go after the right of conscience, the right to religious freedom first. And when you lose that, your political freedom follows shortly thereafter. So it's a battle for the ages, and we have to make that stand. And Senator Vitter and the rest of the leaders in the Congress are going to continue to try to get this thing dismantled and overturned. But in the meantime, we're going to fight it tooth and nail in the courts until they tell us we can't fight anymore.
Mike, assuming that we do get the case in the hearing in the Supreme Court, so it will be specifically, you think, decided, the decision will rest on the validity of the HHS mandate, and so it would strike at that provision and not the entire law. Is that the way it would?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has already decided the entire law. I mean, Obamacare is constitutional, according to, you know, a majority of the Supreme Court. We don't agree with that, but it is what it is. And so what we're left to litigate now is the pieces of it, and this is, as I said, you know, to me, the most fundamental piece, the HHS mandate that says that an employer has to provide essentially abortifacients in their health care plans. And they made this sort of accommodation. Look, in the litigation, I'll just tell you, in the Louisiana case, we're in the Western District of Louisiana in the Federal District Court. The Department of Justice flies their lawyers in, and they're just playing a game of hide the ball. I mean, every time we have a status conference with a judge, it's so infuriating because they come in and we'll make the argument. The judge says, well, now, where do you stand? What's the objection? Explain it to me. We'll lay out the objection. You know, this is in chambers with the judge and opposing counsel. We'll lay out the objection, and the DOJ lawyers go, oh, no, Your Honor, we changed that. What do you mean you changed? Where is that? Where's that in the provisions? Oh, we're going to change it. We're in the rulemaking process. Trust us, Judge. We're going to get rid of that one. What's your next argument? You know, we'll go through, and they just summarily go through, oh, no, Your Honor, we're in the process of changing that. And so a lot of these federal judges go, well, I mean, I'm not going to issue a substantive ruling on this until you guys make the final decisions, the really, really, really final decisions, you know. And it's just like, it's infuriating. But that's how they play the game. They're playing it dirty. They're hiding the ball. Now, they finally come out with the supposed final rulemaking and all this now. But the accommodation they came out with provides no real protection for religious organizations. They so narrowly define what is a religious organization. It's basically just a church. And even then, they're saying, well, you just punt that to your insurer. You don't have to provide it, but your insurer will. Don't worry. Well, that doesn't solve our moral objection.
And not be paid for it.
Right, exactly right.
It's a pure fiction.
It's a legal fiction. And so anyway, that's how they play. It's very frustrating, but you know, we just have to do the best we can. So.
If we could talk just a little bit more about that accommodation and how really ridiculous it is. I looked at the Beckett Fund site just to have some stats, and they note that there are 75 cases and over 200 plaintiffs representing hospitals, universities, businesses, and schools. So as you were saying how narrow it is, if, say, it's a Catholic hospital, it would have to be staffed by Catholics who only serve Catholics. Is that correct?
Right. If you treat any other denomination, they say, oh, well, that's not a purely Catholic institution, and therefore you don't fit the accommodation. I mean, our example, Louisiana College, I mean, it's a Baptist school, but of course they have students from all denominations and no denominations. I mean, it's a college. And because of that, they say, well, you're not a purely Baptist institution, and therefore you're not tantamount to being a church, and so therefore you don't fit. it's just patently ridiculous. In the for-profit cases, I mean, Hobby Lobby is obviously not a church, but these are Christian business people who run their business in accordance with their religious beliefs. If you've ever been in a Hobby Lobby store, you know they play praise music. This is not some charade. This is the way they've always run the business. And if we've come to the point in America where you cannot operate your private enterprise in accordance with your own religious beliefs, we're in very dangerous territory. I mean, we become effectively a communist state. The government can tell you what to do, and it's frightening. So we're not overstating the threat, and we need to gently and in love remind people of how important this is.
And Mike, maybe expand. Even the accommodation, again, is a pure fiction. I mean, it's a pure word game.
It is.
Which particularly makes no sense if you have an entity, and they certainly exist. Church and belief entities certainly exist that are self-insured.
Right. It's more of the shell game. They're just moving it around. They're playing with words. It solves no purpose, and they know that. When they bring that in and make this argument to the court, they know the true effect of it. It's a legal fiction, and it's unworkable. And so it's provided no relief, and we have to keep fighting, and we just hope and pray that we get at least 5 justices on the Supreme Court that agree with this. I mean, I'm frankly, I don't know. I hope that we would. But we'll have to see.
And Mike, to give some sense of the magnitude of the power of the penalties, speaking of Hobby Lobby, because they are such a large company and have thousands of employees, that could mean fines of $1.3 million per day. So right now, that portion is enjoined, I would think.
Yeah, it is as of now. I mean, pending the appeal to the Supreme Court, the 10th Circuit has said, no, we're not going to make Hobby Lobby pay that substantial fine. But listen, the great credit is to the Green family that owns Hobby Lobby stores. I mean, they drew the line in the sand and said, yeah. I think that's inspired a lot of other people to kind of stand up and let their voices be heard, and we need to continue that sort of mantra. That's our narrative. Stand up. If all of us would stand up together, we would have an effect and support, members of Congress and who are doing the great work. So.
I don't know if you can answer this question. How is this comparable to what's going on in Europe or perhaps in Canada? What is the condition of conscience rights in those countries if we would unfortunately have to look to them to see what our future might be?
Well, listen, I gave a seminar yesterday morning to a bunch of high school kids in Shreveport. And I was talking to them about, they wanted me to come in and talk about the Founding Fathers. I always get these very broad, you have 45 minutes. Teach us about the Founding Fathers, But so I always go to the most fundamental, it's the most fundamental thing that we can talk about. Washington said in his famous farewell address, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And Adams said, our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. We're losing the twin pillars, the foundations of the Republic. And the founders warned us, they said, if you do not maintain religion and morality, the right of conscience being the most fundamental bedrock principle of them all, then the Republic is not going to stand. This will not work. This is still an experiment on the world stage. We're only 237 years old, the youngest form of government known to man. It's a great model. The founders were divinely inspired. Don't get me started, Ben. I'll keep going. I know you got nervous. The founders were divinely inspired to set it up the way they did. They set it up in accordance with biblical principles. Don't get me started. But the point is that the religion and morality had to be maintained. And now we're being led from the White House on down to reject and marginalize religious values and to, as Senator Guillory was saying, to just erase all of our moral codes and look down upon those who would try to stand up and say, no, we have to maintain those. We live in a postmodern culture, and postmodernism is defined by the absence of truth. All truths are relative. You know what that makes the claims of the Bible? Inherently intolerant. Truth has been replaced as the greatest virtue in society by tolerance. Well, we're the inherently intolerant ones who say, wait a minute, life is sacred because we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. We have to stand up for those. Oh, you bigot. Can't you be a little more open-minded? Come on. That's so like 18th century. Well, they told us that if we didn't maintain those 18th century values, that the Republic would not stand. And so this is the condition we find ourselves in today. Don't get me started. Don't pitch me a softball, Charlotte. I'll just keep going. Keep going.
Congressman Gow, I just want to ask you. I know during your time in the House, you between your first vote and then the final vote, you were lobbied directly by President Obama on this. So obviously you knew that you were kind of putting your seat on the line in a sense by casting your vote. So I guess I just ask your perspective of those meetings that you had and the dialogue that went on, and then again, did did you know that you were choosing basically life over possibly your seat in Congress?
Thank you very much. Now, first of all, before answering your question, and again, I want to allude to what Senator Vitter stated, which is extremely important. And again, I will lead that into to answering the question. Is the issue of gender selective abortion. For most of us politicians who are pro-life, at times it gets difficult for us to defend our pro-life stance wholeheartedly because we are painted as extreme right, strident, unreasonable, so on and so forth, against women, war against women, so on and so forth. And we are losing that, rhetorical battle when we approach the issue of abortion. And I'm glad that I see a lot of women here. But when you analyze what is going on in countries that have abortion, then you realize what is war on women is like. Because when you look at China, for instance, China now, I believe, is 54% male because of gender selective abortion in China. And so you have millions of men who are unmarried, who cannot find a wife. So what happened? Well, they try to find women in other countries. So now you have a whole slew of problems of human trafficking, especially from countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and the poorer countries. And many of these trafficking of people are women and young female. And they are being trafficked into countries like China and other countries to serve as sex slaves, to serve as wives for males, or what have you. All kinds of deplorable situations. So what is actually a war against women? Well, abortion is war against women. And we have to somehow encourage women to say that, because when male politicians, we stand up and say we are pro-life, we defend women, well, we are painted as anti-women and so on and so forth, and eventually it presents a very confused image of who we are as leaders and as politicians. So I ask for the women in this group to stand up and to really declare what is this actual war against women, and this actual war is abortion. If you're looking at numbers, statistics, if you look at the true situation of the problem, the war against women is abortion. And again, it leads to my final decision to vote against healthcare reform when I was confronted with final passage. And right before the vote, President Obama, he realized that it was going to be an extremely, extremely narrow battle, because there were around 8 members in the House who were very adamant pro-life, and partly of those members were under Stupak. So I was approached by one of Obama's staff. I was invited to the White House to have lunch with one of the staff members, and I told them, is this one of the ploy for President Obama to speak with me, to get my vote on the health care bill? And they told me, no, the president won't be here. He's leave, he will be gone for some kind of a meeting or what have you. So I was called to the White House. I sat down with 2 of the staff members and have lunch, and I ordered, I remember quite succinctly, a hamburger. And before I was able to eat, well, another staff member came down and said, Congressman, President Obama would like to see you. And I said, I thought you told me that the president's not here. I said, well, he's going to leave after he has this meeting with you. So I was led into the White House, into the Oval Office with President Obama, and at that time with Rahm Emanuel, who's the mayor of Chicago now. And surprising to me, Rahm was extremely nice. His reputation on the Hill as being not a very nice person, but he was very nice. He was standing towards the side, just standing there smiling and what have you. And President Obama stood, as you know, he and I, our height is not so comparable. He's extremely tall, and you see me here. So I was looking up to him like this, and he said, Joseph, I really need for you to vote for the healthcare reform bill. I said, well, President Obama, I can never vote for it if you cannot get the pro-life provisions into the Senate bill. And he said, well, at this time, we cannot do that because any amendments to the Senate bill would force it to go back to the Senate for a vote, which after Senator Brown election in Massachusetts, it would be filibustered by the Senate. So there was no way for them to get any pro-life provisions onto the Senate bill. So it was basically rammed through the House. And the only way for them to get the necessary votes in the House was for President Obama to issue an executive order. So that's why you would see all of this language in the public media about the executive order, and he's standing up saying there can be no abortion under my watch or what have you. But we see that to the contrary. And I told him very frankly, I said, there is no way for me to vote for this bill if you cannot get the pro-life provisions in. And I told him very frankly, I said, I know that my vote against health care will cost me my seat. But for me, ultimately, it boils down to, am I able to live with myself after my time in Congress? And so, as you know, I voted against the health care bill, and during my election, I believe of all the House races in 2010, mine was the only one that President Obama intervened on behalf of my opponent. So that tells you the nature of politics.
Thank you so much for your remarks, your courage, especially in bringing up the war on women. We know that in places throughout the world where there's very little health care, there is remarkably an ultrasound machine, so there can be a search and destroy mission to abort baby girls. And we know in the United States that upwards of 60% of women report that they feel coerced into having abortions. So this right that we've had for 40 years is often forced onto women and to girls. And I'm glad to say this past spring we passed a bill in Louisiana to add to the definition of child abuse the coerced abortion of minors. So we're really hopeful that when it starts to roll out with law enforcement that we'll see some children being protected. At this point, we would like to open up the segment for questions. If you would just raise your hand, I'll come to you with the mic.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have a couple of questions, and I'll just lay them out, and then y'all can try to address them. Number one, does the contraceptive mandate and the abortifacient drug mandate that is in the employer mandate, does that also apply to any purchases that are made as individuals? So is the employer mandate also contained in the individual mandate? And a lot of people have been asking me, should I, as a pro-life Christian, not buy any insurance as required by law? In other words, should individuals attempt what companies like Hobby Lobby? And I know there's 4 lawyers in here. I know no one's going to recommend that they break the law, but people are asking, is it a moral issue to purchase insurance in the exchanges or in any of the individual policies? So I'll lay that's it. Thank you.
I'll let our legislators speak to the legal question, but Kathleen, if you're so inclined, I'll defend you pro bono. If you want to not pay the insurance and go to jail, I'll come get you. Who wants the...
That sort of means we'll be happy to visit you in jail. I'm just just translating. No, as I understand it, that DHS mandate is a mandate on all required plans. So that impacts employers, but it also impacts individuals. So that's a very real issue. Yes, absolutely.
In terms of your latter question being about the moral nature, certainly if you're examining it, it's probably not a black or white thing, whereas but more of based on the moral determination of someone's conscience and the decision that they're making. Some people would say that there's a remote cooperation with evil, that if your intention is not, and if you're sufficiently removed from the situation, that you're morally protected based on your conscience and your intention in making the decision. So that would be the case of, for example, if Hewlett-Packard is also giving money to Planned Parenthood or doing something that you're not necessarily, it's not necessarily if you're buying the computer because you know that the money's going to Planned Parenthood and you're excited about that, then certainly that's where you're, but if you're just an average person and you walk in and you buy a Hewlett-Packard computer, are you making an immoral decision completely? Probably not necessarily. If it weighs on your conscience, then certainly your decision should be away from that decision. So it's something that you have to balance with the other things. So it probably determines on the person's conscience and the way they're intending and thinking of the situation at the time, I would say.
Right now, someone could purchase in Louisiana a plan. I think that's that excellent presentation you gave, Ben. They could purchase a plan that does not include abortion coverage.
Correct, but they could not avoid the
contraceptive mandate.
That's correct.
Which is misnamed in the sense that it's really an abortifacient drug mandate.
Yeah, it's whatever the Kathleen Sebelius wants to put HHS mandate. I mean, it's if she wakes up tomorrow and decides the surgical abortion or gym memberships, or it doesn't matter. They can put anything in there.
Right now, it clearly covers medical abortion.
That's right. It clearly covers abortifacients, Ella, Plan B, which is called the morning after pill. It doesn't cover RU486. So RU486 would be like, for example, in Louisiana law. And this is just basing on what our law says, is that abortion is defined as the termination of the pregnancy, and pregnancy is defined as implantation in the uterine lining. So Louisiana law, if you're just looking at it purely off that, would not define what the HHS mandate is doing as abortion per se, but we would define it as abortifacient, which is preventing the implantation of the fertilized egg, the embryo, the human embryo, from implanting in the uterine lining. So you're talking about destruction of human life that's being funded through the HHS mandate.
I was being a little bit flippant earlier, Kathleen, but I really do believe we're in uncharted waters. Okay, if we lose the Supreme Court battle on the HHS mandate, I think we have an unprecedented situation before us as Americans, because always and until this point, the right of conscience has always trumped everything else. We've always had conscientious objector provisions in the law. When it comes down to you're violating your conscience or obeying Caesar's law, the government has always said, okay, we'll give you that accommodation because we're not going to make you violate that. Listen, when my Southern Baptist brethren ask me this question, I say, yeah, we render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's. Okay, the right of conscience is God's. That's between our Creator and us as an inalienable right. Caesar, that's not his realm. So we may very well come to a point very soon, an unprecedented point in American history, where all of us have to make that decision. And, you know, God help us. I hope we do the right thing.
And to echo that and underscore something I said earlier, that's why I said that from the very beginning, I thought Obamacare was an assault on those two elements of the American consensus that at least were in our favor. Yes, abortion is legal, but I think it at least was consensus, still is in many people's minds who don't understand the consequences of Obamacare, that taxpayer funds won't be used to pay for abortion, and that we will protect folks' conscience on issues like abortion. Obamacare is really an all-out assault on those two things, which is a major shift even further in the direction of pro-abortion, and that's why it's so dangerous. And they're doing all these tap dances to cloud the issue. But those tap dances are just that. They're word games, they're legal fictions. Substantively, it's a major shift on those 2 points, which is what makes it so dangerous.
And one of the reasons, going off what Senator Vitter is saying, is we chose to do this panel at this conference is because this bill does, and what's happening today is a departure from what has been the status quo in our country. The problem is that it's so confusing that no one really knows it. You know, I've walked into some Catholic health facilities and they have a document in the back that says, well, what about healthcare reform and abortion? And it kind of gives the Obama line about it, and so people would read it and say, oh, well, you know, there's not that big of a deal connected to it. So because the Senate and the House came pretty close to taking abortion off the Obamacare table, they became so close, but then it just kind of confounded and confused everything in the process. So the hope of what we wanted to do today is make sure that everyone here is aware, and in the Louisiana pro-life movement is aware of the direct connection between Obamacare and abortion, so that we can begin educating our peers and clearly sharing this. Because as we'll talk about later this afternoon about voter education, you have laws that were passed, or the amendments that were defeated. For example, Senator Landrieu voted against one of the Nelson Hatch amendment that was discussed. So you're talking about education that needs to happen. This isn't just theoretical things that needs to happen in our state. Charlotte.
Hi. Thank you very much. I'm kind of at the other end of life, and I'm very concerned about Obamacare and what's going to happen to us. And I'd like to ask the legislators and the lawyer, how are we going to be protected from having our health care cut off? Sure. and our right to life on this end? I
will say that we didn't ignore that. In fact, the next breakout session that Ryan Verrett will be on medical ethics and healthcare reform and Obamacare. So there's going to be we can answer it. I'm just saying that we're not ignoring that conversation. And in fact, last year we had a whole panel breaking that down in our conference last year. But there will be a breakout session. But feel free to.
Let me just make this quick comment, and then there'll be the breakout session. I think that's a very real concern. However, I think we do the debate a disservice and hurt our argument when we overstate it. For instance, death panels. You know, there weren't, quote, death panels in the bill. And when that's the rhetoric, the whole argument is dismissed. What there is in the bill is a lot of mechanisms to control costs through rationing. And that's what every form of socialized medicine that's been developed to date does. People wait for years and years for certain procedures, and often that depends on your status in life and your age. And so older folks in many of these systems never get the procedures in an adequate amount of time. And so I do think there are a lot of mechanisms in the bill that point in that direction to try to control costs. In fact, it's their only strategy to try to control costs. Costs are going up through most other elements of the bill, through sort of overt rationing, and I think that is very, very dangerous for that reason.
I have a quick question. Following up on your comment about what literature was available at a Catholic hospital, that calls into question how so many entities lodged in D.C. that have such a powerful influence throughout the U.S., say the Catholic Health Association, maybe it's the Hospital Association, I'm forgetting. What are some things that we can do to encourage them to modify their literature? We know that the president of CHA was supportive of Obamacare, as Congressman Gao was discussing that complexity. What can we do at the grassroots to address the national entities that have such influence?
I'll make one suggestion. I think the Catholic bishops, clearly the Catholic bishops are the leading voice for the church in America. And I think they should put out a crystal clear and concise summary of the Catholic position on taxpayer funding of abortion under Obamacare and conscience protections under Obamacare, and require any Catholic organizations like the ones you're describing to use that and only that as their response to those issues.
I'm not as a good speaker as the rest, but what I wanted to say was I was concerned about like the groups like the AARP, the ones that that's setting up their own medical things where the groups, everybody, whoever wants to join can, just pay for as a group for themselves. Are they really protected from Obamacare? I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, they're certainly covered by all of these requirements and mandates. So they're now many of those groups supported it anyway, but they're certainly covered.
I think what the question I'm asking is that, from what I've heard, listening to the radio and news and everything, that if they form their own groups and they pay for their own medical things, that they're opted out of Obamacare. That's just not true. I mean, that they're not protected. I mean, if
they can have plans that qualify as acceptable plans under Obamacare, so they can have their plan as they did before Obamacare if they meet the minimum requirements. But certainly they have to live under the law and comply with thousands of provisions of the law.
And the only ones that don't have to comply by the provisions of the law are the people that President Obama like congressmen and senators, right?
Yeah, including members of Congress. Yeah, this is getting a little off topic, but one fight I'm very involved in is to ensure that there's no Washington exemption from Obamacare. One thing you've seen since enactment is basically every powerful group in the country try to, and in most cases, get a carve-out from some of the mandates. Big business got a carve-out in an at least one-year delay of the employer mandate. The unions are in the process of getting a major carve-out. And maybe the most offensive carve-out is essentially a Washington exemption from Obamacare. There was a specific provision which I fought for that said every member of Congress and all congressional staff have to go to the exchanges, the sort of fallback plan for all other Americans. And that's one small battle we actually won. That provision was in Obamacare. Well, it turned out it was an example of what Nancy Pelosi said. We have to pass the law in order to figure out what's in it. Because that provision passed in the law, and then a bunch of people in Washington read it and said, oh, you know what? We can't have this. We can't stand for this. And so there was furious scheming and planning and lobbying behind the scenes, which resulted just this past August in a special Obama administration rule that basically took all of the sting out of that provision by doing two things. First of all, the rule said, well, we don't know who official congressional staff is, so we're going to leave that up to each individual member. And a member can literally decide, none of my staff are official staff for purposes of this provision. Simple as that. The other part of it is that for members and staff who do go to the exchange, they get to take with them a huge taxpayer-funded subsidy, which is not in the statute in any way, shape, or form, which no one else going to the individual exchange gets. And so that's a form of an exemption or a subsidy too. So I'm fighting for a provision that would erase all of that.
And I'm so proud every time I hear his name attached to the Vitter Amendment. Isn't that great? I'm like, yeah, that's our guy.
Do you have a hard time hiring staff these days because they know that they're gonna? Okay,
I have a question. Good morning. I was wondering, for the non-Catholic clergy, do you all have any I don't have that problem in the church that I attend, thank the Lord. But do you have any recommendations on how to reach them and speak to them to the issue of the right to life?
I may be the token Southern Baptist on the panel, so I'll tell you that I'm very concerned. I'm not just picking on my denomination, but many Protestant denominations, and let's be honest, many nominal Catholics are completely clueless about what's going on, and that's the problem. That's how we've gotten to where we are today. Is because for about 40 or 50 years we were asleep at the wheel, and now suddenly we're waking up, and there was a culture war going on out there, and now the hand grenades are hitting in our own backyard, and everybody's waking up. Increasingly, I think we still have a lot of work to do. I told you I was talking to this high school group yesterday in Shreveport, and the Barna Research Group just came out with a study in the American Bible Society, and they have this map where they've charted the most Bible-minded cities in America. Okay, there's an actual survey on that, and as you can imagine, it's cold and blue on the eastern seaboard and along California. But the number 2 ranked Bible-minded city in America is Shreveport, Louisiana. Okay, next to Knoxville, Tennessee. And so the kids were like, yes, and they all applauded themselves and everything. And I said, well, hold on just a second. But I don't know about you guys, but I'm not exactly feeling the Holy Spirit all around the city here. The casinos are down there taking over the riverfront. We got the strip club down there. We got all the, and by the way, Shreveport is the abortion capital of Louisiana, okay? And they went, oh. See, there's a disconnect. It's more than just about wearing some badge saying I'm a Baptist, because Shreveport is also, by the way, the most Baptist city in America, okay? Literally. There's more Baptists in Shreveport than any city in America, not per capita. So it should be the holiest place on earth, but I'm telling you it's not, okay? The problem is, as you know, there's a disconnect. And so a lot of people will say these things, oh yeah, I believe in the sanctity of human life, but they never put any feet, no action to it. They wouldn't even know where to begin. And I think that's why you're here today. That's why I'm here. Is that we feel this burden, and we know that we've got to be sentinels to raise the alarm, and to teach people Louisiana Right to Life, the whole federation, whatever all of us are doing. I mean, we're trying to raise awareness that then becomes action to then where we can save lives, and that's what it's ultimately about. That's what the Life March is about. We're doing the. Can I plug Life March North? Okay, yeah, the first one ever is we're doing a North Louisiana one. And I'm going out promoting this idea, and people are like, wow, what a novel concept. We ought to get together and support the sanctity of life. I'm like, oh, my goodness. It's part of our doctrinal statement of faith, and yet no one does anything about it. So I believe it's a grassroots movement, but as part of that process, we have to go to the leaders, the clergy, and sometimes sell them on why they should speak up and then how to do it. And I feel like if we give them a toolbox, Ryan Verrett's done a great job putting together some kind of nuts and bolts. This is what pro-life activism looks like. And I believe if we do that, as awareness is being raised, as everybody's kind of hypersensitive about the issue right now, let's seize this moment and turn it into action and create a new movement, a new era, of pro-life activism in Louisiana. Yeah.
I want to thank our elected officials for standing up for us for so many years, and at personal cost, at the warfare that you experience in your own families, and for you to know that we're praying for you as your constituents and while you're up there. I just want to say very quickly that, this is a defining moment in our nation and in our community, and I'm reminded of Martin Niemöller and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Mother's Day of 2007, I found myself in Warsaw, Poland, and 4 hours away from Auschwitz. And so I knew I had to take a tour up to Auschwitz, took a 4-hour train ride up there. And it was significant that it was Mother's Day, and I was looking and I was saying, Lord, why am I here? Why am I here? And all I could hear was the word America. And in 2007, I couldn't fathom that. But in 2013, I can. And so I just say this, that, it's a very alarming time where if we could talk about health care, but America is coming out of her anesthesia, and hopefully the church is too. And I guess this is what I want to say to y'all as elected officials, is that we're talking about the war on women. We have a lot of women in here, and also a lot of constituents in here. And I believe God's calling each one of us to be activated in the Army, no matter what the cost, just as Congressman Gao and Senator Vitter have experienced, to be able to lay down our own lives and our own desires, our own comfort zone, I guess is what it is, because it's going to take all of us. And I guess my question is to y'all, is there are some of us, like myself, as a poster board of woman, and I know that there are others that are in here too, we're willing to come to Washington. I know Charlotte will lead us as a lawyer. But we are willing to come to Washington and lay down our lives for this generation and share our stories before Congress, articulately and factually, of what abortion does to women, what it does to mothers that are raising this nation in post-abortion pain. And so that's what I want to offer to you and other women that are here that would be willing to stand up, and we would be willing to come to Congress and to testify before a special committee, not only us from Louisiana, but especially Louisiana, because we are the leaders in life for the nation. Amen? But also, I believe Justice Foundation has over 5,500 sworn legal affidavits of how abortion hurts women. And I believe that the voices of women in this nation need to be heard. Thank you very much.
If I may, to respond to that very quickly, I believe that for the voice of women, your time and effort would be much more beneficial for you to speak to the public, because the members of Congress, those who are pro-life understand what we're talking about. Those who are pro-choice, they will not listen to you no matter what you say. The only way for us to change the culture of America is for women who have had the experience to speak out and to let the public know of the terrible consequences of abortion. Because abortion is legal in this country, we have become so insensitive to the issue, and we're linking legality with morality to say that if it's legal, then therefore it is right. Well, that's absolutely false. We have to let the public know, and here again, I would ask those of you who have experienced the terrible consequences of abortion to speak out, because us politicians, when we do that, our words can be twisted, and here again they will say, here's another male who are trying to control the lives of female, and the debate gets lost. So if women were to speak out and to speak out to the public, I believe that it will be much more beneficial than to go to Washington and waste your time with the people up there.
Joseph's absolutely right, and let me just echo that briefly. First of all, I appreciate that offer, and I too am very encouraged about how many women are here. Every year, what encourages me so much about the pro-life rallies and marches in Baton Rouge and Washington is how many young people are there, equally important. But Joseph's right, save the plane ticket to Washington, and he said the public. I'll try to make it even closer at hand. family members, neighbors, business associates. We need to win the hearts and minds of America. Elbert correctly said we need to change laws. Absolutely. But the laws will change when the hearts and minds change. And Joseph's the 1 in a million exception to the rule of somebody who's going to put his political life on the line over the issue. The other 999,999 are going to follow their constituents, and that's who we need to change.
Well, I think we owe them separately. First, I think we owe Congressman Gow, and I don't even know if you've ever been in a pro-life gathering since that time, and I just think we owe you a round of applause for what you did. And you might as well, you can sit down, you're going to stand up again in a second, because we know, and I believe firmly, there's a lot of politicians and elected officials out there that sometimes we have to twist their arm, even if they're pro-life, to do things or come and speak and be clear. Senator Vitter is not one of those. He's one of the special ones that is committed, first and foremost, to this cause. It's not hard for us to get in touch with him if something needs to be done. Typically, we don't need to ask him because he does it before we even ask him to do it. So we just owe a great gratitude to Senator Vitter, and thank you for standing for us in D.C. And I want to thank Mike and for his leadership and guidance, and thank you to Charlotte for moderating the panel. I'm just going to go ahead and announce these. I'll go ahead and do